You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by the National Association of Convenience Stores.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Leonard. I'm with the National Association of Convenience Stores, and we talk about things that relate to convenience stores, not just here, but around the world, and how they affect customers.
And I'm John Eichberg with NACS and the Fuels Institute. And, you know, Jeff, we talk about everything that powers your life, whether it powers your body, powers your fuel, powers your activities. Convenience stores are there for you every day. And today we're going to talk about something that's actually could have some major ramifications for the industry, the deregulation of the Mexican market on fuel sales and introduction of competition to that business. Recently, our friends down south in Mexico have entered a interesting period in their fuel market. They are deregulating, and for the first time ever, there is the introduction of competitive pressures within the market. And so today we have got Norman Turiano with us. Norman is a member of the Fuels Institute Board of Directors. He spent more than 30 years working on food and fuel business issues with the convenience store chain Wawa. And the last 3 or 4 years, he's been consulting to the industry and has done quite a bit of work with some clients down in the Mexico market, helping them get ready for it. So, Norman, thanks for joining us on Convenience Matters.
It's good to be here.
Now, I'm going to open it up with a very simple question. From your work down in Mexico, as we start witnessing the transition and as the news in the United States starts actually paying attention to this, what are we dealing with down there? What is going on? What do you see as the opportunities, and what do you expect to be happening down there as the Mexican market starts to make this transition to a more open, competitive situation?
Okay. I'd like to start by saying, since I've started working down there, I was warned initially by my clients that Mexico was 40 years behind the United States in many areas, especially regarding fuel retailing and upstream distribution, etc. And I thought they were exaggerating, but apparently what they told me is true. They have been state-controlled and monopoly for the last 70 years. And because of that, they've operated inefficiently, and they now import 53% of their finished product for transportation fuels, mostly from the United States. So in an effort to modernize and change that situation, they have gone through a deregulation process that began about 2 years ago, and in fact has set up created a number of issues because, unfortunately, no one having had any experience with a free market, there's certain concepts that they don't quite understand. And I do, in fact, spend a lot of my time trying to explain the concept of margins that are not guaranteed. That's a great example, as a matter of fact, Tom. They've had guaranteed margins of about 6.5% over time. Whatever their cost is, they are told they will sell it for. There's no competition on the street. Everyone sells it for the same price. They're all branded as Pemex, which is Petróleos Mexicanos. And it's been pretty much an easy business until now. Now that we're going through the deregulation process, the concept of floating margins, and especially the scary concept of sometimes they might not have any margins, and at other times they have large margins, it's completely foreign.
Yeah.
They keep asking me what the United States has for a margin, and as you well know, there is no such number.
And one of the things, anytime you had gone to Mexico previously, there's no gas price signs. So when you say deregulation, no competition, that means there's no reason to have a gas price sign because everybody's priced the same. There may be some sort of indication at the pump what the price is, but it's not to lure you to the store. So I guess there's a whole new dynamic there in how do you educate how the gas price sign factors into things. And in our market, I know that it's often been a joke that first person who introduced the gas price sign, we need to find him and yell at him because it's created a situation where gas isn't really a high margin commodity, yet they're going through the same process and in a certain extent making the same mistakes, I guess, on a product that is entirely price sensitive.
And that's a very good observation, Jeff, because when you go to Mexico, a good 2/5 of the price sign, and I sign because that's what I'm used to in the United States. It's a misnomer. It's the toll sign without price. It has 2/5 of its size dedicated to the Pemex brand at the top, and there's other items that are by regulation required to be on the sign. Every grade that they sell, which in Mexico there's only 2 grades generally. There is no mid-grade. Magna, which is their regular, and then premium, and then if they have diesel, diesel is listed. But there's no prices next to it. And there's also a small area where the individual retailer's name is, be it Oxxo or Renda Chicas or Gasmart, Echo, etc. So there was never any need. In fact, the only numeric sign on the property is usually listed on the building, and that is, in fact, the exchange rate between the U.S. dollar and the peso.
And as this year, as 2017 started, there was unrest, to say the least. There's been a change in the price, and there is a concern in Mexico about what's going on with gas prices, and you've even seen some folks find product in the U.S., and I don't mean refiners and I don't mean retailers. I mean people driving from Mexico to the U.S. to get fuel, because that's easier going over the border than finding it in some of these border towns. So take us through what's going on now and how we wound up here.
Okay, yeah. Actually, all of that traffic's being driven by scarcity versus price, etc. So let me set this up for you. What happened 2 years ago was, as part of the deregulation process, rather than dictate the price, retail price, I should say, based off cost on an annual basis, which was adjusted monthly, they began doing it more frequently and gave retailers some flexibility in their price. However, that flexibility was not to the benefit of the retailers, because the flexibility they offered was to sell it for less than what the maximum price was. But it was still for retailers to offer different prices in order to compete with their competition. For the most part, most of those retailers did not take part in that, and there's a good reason for it. One of my clients did not offer any discounts and only saw about a 10% decrease in volume. Now, in the United States, I would expect at least a 30% decrease in volume, if not more, based on the price differential, which was about 50 pesos. 50 pesos being the equivalent of about 2-3 cents. So in the United States, as you will know from the studies done by NACS and the Institute, that 2 cents will drive somebody well out of their way for fuel. In Mexico, it hasn't happened, and it's largely because the Mexican consumer perceives that if you're selling for a price that's less, you're probably getting less product. And unfortunately, that is not unusual in Mexico. There is a large number of retailers who, in fact, may not be delivering the full amount of gas. So that was about 2 years ago. Now, last year, the deregulation process was that they started issuing permits for companies to begin moving product into the country, and product being refinable product or finished product. Unfortunately, outside of the Pemex universe, that would be. Unfortunately, a couple of hundred permits were issued and no one acted on them because of the price controls that the state had still put onto the retail price. In other words, nobody wanted to act on the permits because there was really no way for them to make any money by doing so. The government then saw this as being an issue, and they decided to increase the deregulation process and put into effect in 2017, this past January, things that weren't meant to take place until 2018 or beyond. So as of January of this year, they removed the subsidized nature of the gasoline and allowed it to be matched to some degree against the world market. What did this end up doing? It ended up increasing retails on January 1st by approximately 20%. In the border cities, maybe only 15%, but generally across the country, 20%. This was a complete shock to the citizens who were told that deregulation was being done in order to lower the price of gasoline. And unfortunately, the citizens have registered their unhappiness through large-scale protests. In the city of Puebla, 20,000 people are reported to have been part of the protest. Largely, protests have been peaceful, but in some areas they've been violent with looting, general looting, and of course, people taking advantage of the situation. To a large degree, a lot of the protests have taken place at the refineries. For example, Rosarita, which is in Baja California, and in that part of Mexico, they shut off the roadways and product is not able to be delivered. So not only did the prices go up 20%, there was a scarcity of product at the stations, on the streets, and to a large degree, cars would wait at stations waiting for a delivery truck to show up, or in large numbers cross the border. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who crossed the border initially were not able to come back into Mexico because the protests at the border about the price had in effect shut down the border. Donald Trump would be thrilled.
So you don't need to build a wall, just increase prices.
Right.
So, I mean, clearly, a transition like this, the initial reaction does not appear to have been orchestrated in the most seamless way, in the most efficient way. Yet, these type of things have a way of smoothing out, and things will stabilize, and the market will get to an equilibrium position. Once we get there, what do you envision to be the potential impact on the U.S. market? Now, we saw a report about, I think, the first tanker truck crossed the border into Mexico earlier this year. There's an opportunity for refiners to start producing and sending product down there. Do you see any type of significant impact of the Mexican deregulation on the U.S. market at all?
From a fundamental standpoint, John, I don't. And I'll tell you why. They are currently moving 53% of finished product into the country to meet their demand. So that's not going to change. The fundamental numbers of demand will not change. What will change is the opportunity for U.S. companies to make a greater profit by directly bringing in product and distributing it and offering retail station owners the ability to brand themselves as, be it Valero, Gulf, Phillips, et cetera, any other brand name that they want to fly in that country. But the actual numbers, because I talked about this with one of my peers, and the only effect we could see was if it had drawn more product out of the U.S., it could, in fact, increase prices in the U.S. But since that product's greatly coming from here anyway, we don't see any large effect on pricing in the U.S.
So really, I mean, the effect might be the expansion of traditionally North American brands into the Mexican sphere, which could have a long-term benefit for those brands and possibly evolving the Mexican market to resemble more closely what we see here in the U.S.?
Absolutely. But the real opportunity I see would be for operators of convenience stores. Today, less than half of retailers who sell gas in Mexico have a convenience store offer, as opposed to what we have in the United States. In fact, the percentage that do have convenience stores, today it's a disconnected shopping experience. I have noted myself, it's extremely rare that someone purchasing gas then goes inside the building. So that magic number that we all look for in terms of what percentage goes inside and makes a purchase. In Mexico, if I have to go by my observations, I'd say that's 2%. So there's a real opportunity moving forward to develop that side of the business. Of course, the restraint that would be there would be that the Mexican consumer just does not accept that shopping proposition.
Well, it's interesting that you started out by talking about the market being 40 years behind the U.S. market. And you think about 40 years ago, there was the same disconnect between gas stations and convenience stores roughly 40 years ago, and it took the first oil shock of the early 70s to change consumer perceptions that, yeah, I'll pump my own gas to save a penny or two, and that's what they started doing. Then, of course, we had another oil shock at the end of the decade, and so basically the 70s were a transition period for our industry where there were gas lines, there were fistfights at the pump, frustration all around, and that was when gas was under $1 a gallon. Didn't happen to go above $1 a gallon until I think 79. So they're wrestling with a lot of the same things, how the industry will evolve, and probably will evolve more quickly with the convenience and gas offer being combined, because it's been done before. It wasn't really done before the U.S. did it in the 70s.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because my thoughts have been that even in the United States, the concept of prepared food, fast casual type food, being part of a convenience/gas offer has only been really at the forefront the last 15 to 20 years. So Mexico being 40 years behind, they may not have even come near development, let alone a peak of that concept. And like as you're saying, Jeff, it could move a lot quicker than it did in the United States, just because of the changes in the marketplace at this point in time.
So,
I believe there's a big opportunity for the new paradigm that we see, such as the Wawa Sheets Quick Trip Racetrack product offer inside the buildings.
So, Norman, do you see an opportunity for traditional North American chains to branch out and start operating stations down there? Or is it more an opportunity for those companies that have franchise-type operations to expand their franchise and brand some stores down in Mexico? Or is it going to be much more domestically organic, where Mexican convenience stores are going to kind of blossom into something more similar to what they see in the United States? Actually,
John, what I believe will happen is existing Mexican companies will evolve into a United States style convenience store gasoline offer, fuel offer, I should say. The one most best positioned for that right now is OXXO, large Mexican company. They are aggressively growing, and I believe they're going to take advantage of this and move into that product, that type of brand offer quicker than anyone else. As far as U.S. companies and their opportunities, I think the larger companies have an opportunity, but clearly I believe the franchise model may flourish more in that environment than anything else at this point in time. So I'd see it as a mix between existing Mexican companies and franchises such as Circle K, 7-Eleven, et cetera.
So, I mean, Jeff, what I'm hearing is that basically the Mexican situation will have limited impact and relevance to the U.S. market right now. But I think we need to keep an eye on it, because disruption down in Mexico has a history of bleeding across the border in the United States, whether it's business disruption or civil disruption, whatever it is. And if that situation doesn't stabilize relatively soon, we could see some ramifications across the border.
Yeah, and one of the things, Mexico has traditionally been one of the top 10 producers or suppliers, I believe, of oil to the U.S., and that dynamic has changed. So supply, demand, it all fits in. Right now, the world has about 1 million barrels a day surplus. That is tightening. We are going to be, within a year or so, we're going to have more demand than supply, and that's going to pinch the world market. But we're also seeing on micro levels where what might happen in Mexico could certainly have effect on the U.S., could have effect on Europe. It all fits into that broader scheme of demand.
So, Norman, when we think about this, there's obviously in every market situation and transition, there's winners and losers. From your perspective, who stands to have the greatest potential to win in this situation?
Clearly, John, the people that will win are the companies and organizations that supply the convenience store market, particularly those out on the forecourt. For example, since price signage is not part of the pole sign today, there's an opportunity for price sign manufacturers there's an opportunity for those who offer pricing software, because as the government will no longer dictate price, retailers are curious as to how will they determine their price. Fuel dispenser manufacturers have an opportunity because a lot of the equipment today is ancient and they're all looking to upgrade. A lot of the retailers in Mexico have waited until this moment to determine what they should be doing and waited to see what the government was going to do. I believe there's going to be a lot of consolidation across the border. Smaller retailers will be absorbed. Large retailers will become larger, and they will make investments in capital.
So I guess, if we think about it in that context, Jeff, we may see a much larger contingent of attendees from Mexico at the NACS show going forward as they try to modernize their store offer.
And that's probably something a supplier wants to pay attention to at the NACS show or any other events. It's not just the U.S. market, it's a global market.
Yes, you know what? Thank you very much, Norma. We appreciate your insight on what's going on to our friends down south in Mexico. And for everybody listening to Convenience Matters, pay attention. You never know how market changes are going to affect your business, but there may be opportunities to take advantage of, and you need to do that. So thanks, everybody, for listening to Convenience Matters.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information about the National Association of Convenience Stores, go to nacsonline.com.